Alright, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently, we are in 2 Kings, and we're going to try to get through chapters 10 and 11. Not going to guarantee chapter 11, but we're going to attempt. This is, again, we're just trekking along with the reigns of the king, trekking along to really the Babylonian invasion. And we're really, you can almost say, charting their sins that they are storing up. But they're doomed. When we get there, it will be one of the most pathetic things you will be able to read about. I find that just let me go on because I don't want to get too far. We have plenty of time when we get there, but here we're seeing this repeated sins. So last time Jehu became king, and then he has the prophet anointed him king, and now he is ridding out the sons, the inheritance of the wicked king Ahab. So this is sort of his what Jehu will, in a sense, be commissioned by God to do. All right, so verse 1, it says, since Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria, Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria to the rulers of Jezreel, and to the elders and to the guardians of Ahab's sons, saying, when this letter arrives, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots, horses, and a fortified cities and weaponry, select the most qualified of your master's sons, send him on his father's, set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. However, they were terrified and reasoned, look, 2 kings couldn't stand against him. How can we? So the overseer of the palace, the overseer of the city, and the elders and the guards sent the message to Jehu, we are your servants, and we will do whatever you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever you think is right. Then Jehu wrote them a second letter, saying, if you are on my side, and if you will obey me, bring me the heads of your master's son at this time tomorrow at Jezreel. All 70 of the sons' kings were being cared for by the city's prominent men. And when the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered all 70, put their heads in a basket, and then sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. And when the messengers came and told him, they have brought the head of the king's son, and the king said, pile them into 2 heaps at the entrance of the gates until the morning. Now this, of course, we're seeing very brutal. As I said before, the Chronicles of the Kings here, the letter of the Kings, show the very political structure, but also the ruthlessness of it. This is one of them. I mean, think about how many baskets 70 heads would carry, right? Of course, 70 heads is proof. Think about how bloody that is. So this is this, and remember, we are divorced from the reality of the stench, right? The potential disease, all of that. But you're seeing how brutal and bloody this is, and this is what Jezebel also, remember, how when she reigned, it was bloody, ruthless. So this judgment of them, and if you're thinking too, maybe this is unfair to the sons, we're just not given the details. They were wicked as well. Okay, they were wicked as well. Verse 9, the next morning when he went out and stood at the gate, he said to all the people, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master to kill him. But who struck down all these? Know then that not a word the Lord spoke against the house of Ahab failed. For the Lord has done what he's promised through his servant Elijah. So Jehu killed all who remained in the house of Ahab at Jezreel, all his great men, close friends, priests, leaving him no survivors. And he set out and went on his way to Samaria. And on the way, while he was at Beth Ekel of the shepherds, Jehu met a relative of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and asked, "Who are you?" They asked, "We are Ahaziah's relatives, and we have come down to greet the king's sons and the queen's mother's sons." Now, they didn't have social media or news media, so they didn't know, which is kind of interesting because during this time, yeah, you could go sometimes, of course, months without ever knowing this stuff. Sometimes not ever knowing because, again, they didn't have the news media. Verse 14, then Jehu ordered, "Take them alive." So they took them alive and then slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Ekel. 42 men. He didn't spare any of them. And when they left there, he found Jehoiada, son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and then asked, "Is your heart one with mine?" "It is," Jehoiada replied. Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand, and Jehu pulled him up into the chariot with him. And then he said, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he let him ride with him in his chariot. And when Jehu came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained from the house of Ahab in Samaria until he had annihilated his house, according to the word the Lord had spoke to Jehu. Now, one of the most interesting things that we're going to see about this is, and we'll see this later, notice he's saying his zeal for the Lord. But we're going to see he doesn't have a full heart, which is amazing. Now, all of this that God had wrought by him, and he's acknowledging that God had sent him to do that by the prophecy of the prophet. Just follow this. Verse 18. Then Jehu brought all of the people together and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him a lot." Now remember, we said since news was slow to spread, they have not heard about Ahab's son, 70 sons whom he's killed. Verse 19. Now therefore summon to me all the prophets of Baal and all his servants and all his priests. None must be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing will not live. However, Jehu was acting deceptively in order to destroy the servants of Baal. Now, this is kind of interesting because, again, in his zeal, he's killing off all of the pagan worshippers, all of the evil men, all of the wicked men. Verse 20, Jehu commanded, "Concentrate a solemn assembly for Baal." So they called one. Then Jehu sent the messengers throughout all of Israel, and all the servants of Baal came. And there was not a man who was left who did not come. And they entered the temple of Baal, and it was filled from one end to the other. And then he said to the custodian of the wardrobe, "Bring out the garments for all of the servants of Baal." So that he brought out all the garments. And Jehu and Jehoiada, I hope I know I'm pronouncing this wrong. Jehoiada, son of Rechab, entered the temple of Baal. And Jehu said to the servants of Baal, "Look carefully to see that there are no servants of the Lord here among you, only the servants of Baal." Then they went in to offer the sacrifice and burnt offering. Now you will note that he did separate the servants of the Lord, that they do not perish with the wicked. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside, and he warned them, "Whoever allows any of the men I am delivering into your hands to escape will forfeit his life for theirs." And when he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guards and the officers, Go in and kill them. Don't let anyone out." So they struck them down with the sword. Then the guards and the officers threw the bodies and went into the inner room of the temple of Baal, and they brought out the pillars of the temple of Baal and burned them and tore them down and tore down the pillars of Baal. And then they tore down the temple of Baal and made it a latrine, which it is to this day. So, meaning a bathroom. The word latrine there means bathroom. Now, this was great reforms on Jehu's part. I mean, you could. This what he's doing here is kind of a great work for the Lord. But as sometimes the kings of Israel go, let's continue. Verse 28: Jehu eliminated Baal worship from Israel. He did not turn away, but notice this: he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit, worshiping the gold calf that were in Bethel and Dan. Now, here's what is amazing: that these calves were still around. That's the first thing. And no one destroyed these calves. And then what is even more amazing is, notice he worshiped these calves, having heard the prophecies of God, that he turned so away from God, that it in itself is bewildering and just amazing. Verse 30, nevertheless the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my sight, and have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, 4 generations of your sons will sit on the throne of Israel. Yet Jehu was not careful to follow the instructions of the Lord, God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sin that Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. And in those days the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel. Hazael defeated the Israelites throughout the territory, from Jordan eastward and all the land of Gilead, to the Gadites, the Reubenites and Manassites, from Aor, which is by the Arnon valley, through Gilead to Bashan. Now the rest of the events of Jehu's reign, along with all of his accomplishments and all of his might, are they not written in the historical record of Israel's kings? Jehu rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. His son Jehoahaz became king in his place, and the length of Jehu's reign over Israel and Samaria was 28 years. So again, just kind of amazing that after all of that, he would fall so hard. Yeah, that's just amazing. Now, let me just say this from a New Testament perspective. One, they still had this sinful nature. However, the rationale behind that, because even with a sinful nature, there are certain things you don't have to do when you are exposed to certain things. But anyway, chapter 10, it says, when Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to annihilate all the royal heirs. And Jehoshaphat, who was king Jeroboam's daughter, and Ahaziah's sister, secretly rescued Joash, the son of Ahaziah, from the king's sons, who were being killed, and put him in one of the nurses' room in the bedroom, and so he was hidden from Athaliah, and was not killed. And Joash was hiding with sorry, butchering these names, Jehoshabi, in the Lord's temple 6 years, while Athaliah ruled over the land. Again, sorry for butchering these names right here. Then in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent messengers and brought in the commanders of hundreds, the Karites and the guards, and had them come in to the Lord's temple, where he made a covenant with them and put them under oath. He showed them the king's son, and commanded them, this is what you ought to do. A third of you who are to come on duty on the Sabbath are to provide protection for the king's palace. A third ought to be at the sure gate, and a third at the gate behind the guards. You ought to take turns providing protection for the palace. Your two divisions that go off duties on the Sabbath are to provide protection for the Lord's temple. You must completely surround the king with weapons in hand. Anyone who approaches the ranks is to be put to death. You must be with the king in all of his daily tasks. Now this is kind of interesting because you can almost say that this is sort of a coup, but it is also a preserving of, God's will and also the king. Verse 9, so the commanders of hundreds did everything Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought their men, those coming on duty on the Sabbath, and those going off duty, and they went to Jehoiada the priest. The priest gave the commanders of hundreds, the priest gave to the commanders of hundreds King David's spears and shields that were in the Lord's temple. Then the guards stood with their spears in hand surrounding the king, from the right side of the temple to the left side, by the altar and by the temple. Now we have seen that had Athaliah found out, she certainly would have killed them. She had already hit the heirs. She just didn't know about this son. And of course, when we're talking about these kind of dynasties here, the heir of the son, we got a glimpse of this when the queen died recently, and so then you have, the sons going on right there. Anyway, verse 12. Verse 11 again. Then the guards stood with their weapons in hand surrounding the king, from the right side of the temple to the left side by the altar of the temple. And he brought out the king's son and put a crown on him and gave him the testimony and made him king. They anointed him and clapped their hands and cried, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard the noise from the guard and the crowd, she went out to the people in the Lord's temple, and as she looked, there was the king standing by the pillar according to the custom. And then the commanders and the trumpeters were by the king, and all of the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing the trumpets. Athaliah tore her clothes and screamed, "Treason, treason," which in fact it was her, the one who initially committed treason. And then of course she forgot how she got to be queen. Verse 15. Then Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders of hundreds in charge of the army, take her out between the ranks and put her to death by the sword, and anyone who follows her. For the priest had said she is not to be put to death in the Lord's temple. So they arrested her, and she went through the horse entrance to the king's palace, where she was put to death. Then Jehoiada there made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they would be the Lord's people, and another covenant between the king and his people. So all of the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore down. Now remember, in Jehu's time, that was in Israel. This is in Judah. Okay, so this is in Jerusalem, and this is actually the temple that Solomon had built. Okay, verse 18. So all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They broke their altars and images into pieces, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, at the altars. Then Jehoiada the priest anointed guards for the Lord's temple. He took the commanders of hundreds and the Karites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king from the Lord's temple. They entered the king's palace by the way of the guard's gate. Then Joash sat on the throne of the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quieted, for they had put Athaliah to death by the sword of the king's palace. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Now we'll get to Joash later, but this is Athaliah. I mean, again, we're seeing a very bloody time in these kingdoms with these rulers, these the kings and stuff. Now we're going to see this priest next time. What is interesting about this priest is that Joash, as long as that priest is alive, will follow the Lord. He is an extremely powerful influence on the king's life. We'll see this next time. Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe this video. Subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that add all your comments. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next study.